But if you're looking at mini PCs, there are so many ways to play, but also even like cheaper ways.
Alright, so for the number 5 position, I choose the Dell mini PC. I've got myself the i5, the 7th generation. And in my main review, I told you like I didn't have a great experience with it. Maybe I did something wrong, or just this thing has not like great compatibility. It doesn't even matter. There are like all kinds of versions out there with the kind of generation of CPUs. And I personally really love this Dell, and that's just still the reason I just need to implement this in my top 5. And I just give it the number 5 position simply because there were some things I didn't really like about the casing in general.
And something we don't need to forget, that this thing comes in a very nice slim format. Like this thing is absolutely cool to basically like put underneath your television, slap some Botocera on it and you can just play some games. And that is what I particularly like about it, the form factor. But how powerful is it? But let's talk about the options. So let's open it up and let's see what we're going to get in the inside. Because not all of the slim like mini PCs have the option to add yourself a hard drive. This is not going to be a big of a deal, simply because we do have like 3.0 ports, so we can basically use that method. It's also very fast, but the thing is almost like I want to record something, I realized that I forgot how to freaking open up these things. Alright, so this thing comes with some awesome features. To begin with, we do have the option to swap out the 2.5 inch drive for an SD or a hard drive. Then we have like even an internal speaker, so if you like that kind of things. So that is also an option with this. The way how they cool the CPU here is also a very nice way. They're using this special tunnel kind of cooling. Underneath we do have a like cooling element. It sucks the air from the outside and blows it all the way to the front over here. What I also like about it is that we can remove the SSD or the hard drive fairly easy. Another option is pretty damn cool. We do have the option to build in an internal SSD if you want to and pull it on the mainboard itself. But if you need to get freaking like replacing the RAM modules, it's going to be a little bit more hassle. We need to remove the cooling element somehow, or the cooler itself, because it's underneath here. That's a little bit of a bummer.
Alright guys, so I just noticed in a lot of like games that we had a lot of stuttering, a lot of problems, but it didn't implement in every single game system, especially when you're looking at the MAME. I've noticed that Killer Instinct was running pretty damn good, and it also implemented for the Mortal Kombat series. But when we're going to deep dive into the Tekken, there we got some problems, and somehow my system didn't want to basically run it at all or very good. It's a little bit of a bummer because a lot of systems that have like slower chips or like older chips had a better compatibility when it comes to this game, and many other systems that didn't run on this Dell. But if you're going to get a better compatibility or a different chip that has a better, let's say, performance and overall, I think this Dell can be an absolutely cool retro beast. It's super compact, it comes still in a very beautiful casing. The only thing I didn't really like was of course like that we need to like rip out the freaking CPU cooler so far I can see for replacing the modules or the memory modules. But beside that point, I think in overall this thing has a lot of potential. And I really love the form factor of this mini machine.
Okay, so for my number 5 position, I have chosen for this Dell. And this mini Dell was a little bit of a disappointing situation. But the reason I still want to implement it in my video is because this version, the Optiplex 3050, had a lot of issues with Botocera somehow. I've been messing around with it for a very long time, messing around with the CPU cooling, trying to different RAM modules, like putting the hard drive inside. But still, I think there are a lot of versions out there that will run just fine. But mine version that came with the different chip, the i5 7500T, somehow it did have issues. Nevertheless, but still want to implement it because I think it's a really cool piece of tech and they are like very cheap to find nowadays.
At the number 4 position, I have chosen the Texho, the i5 edition I've purchased from AliExpress. So basically this mini PC is kind of a new and old. So they're using old chips in new kind of PCs. That's kind of interesting in my opinion. The prices were pretty damn okay depending what kind of model you're buying. Of course, more powerful chip means you may pay more for it. But this i5, I just wanted to see what you can do with this first generation chip in this new case. Is this thing any good? And how is it with compatibility, of course, with Botocera? Can you build this thing a retro beast from basically like a new / old model? I'm really curious about this, so that's something we're going to try out. We're also going to do a teardown and I'll show you what I didn't really like about it.
But let's talk about this AliExpress model and what are we going to get when it comes to connectivity and what we can do on the inside when it comes to maybe like implementing a hard drive. Okay, so the first thing I found quite weird and interesting at the same time is like we do have like two USB 3.0. That is interesting. but also weird, and the reason is because they are not on the back, but I will show you later. We do have two USB ports, then we have like a jack out, do have the option for a microphone, and of course we do have an on and off switch at the front. Construction wise of the mini PC is quite okay. They're using this very thin, let's say, metal. They come with a very nice rubber feet, so that part is not bad at all. The only thing that is like what I already mentioned before is like it's kind of weird that we do have like only the option for, yeah, the USB 3.0 at the front and not at the back. So we do have like another like 2 sets of USB ports, in total 4, so we're going to get 8 in total. We also have like a jack out and a microphone here, VGA out, and this one does have HDMI out and the input for the power supply. The power supply they are using is a very nice one. This is a 12 volt 4 amp, quite heavy one, and also it doesn't get really hot. It gets a very nice light over there when you plug it in. Okay, but the question remains like what can we do in the inside? So you do have like these mini devices that have the option to a 2.5-inch hard drive. What is convenient if you just want to build yourself like a retro game beast, it's super easy to do so, because you can just plug in the hard drive. But there we're going to get basically the first problem I'm having with this thing. There we go. So when we're going to open it up, you will see we have a problem over here. There is, so far I can see, no way of adding a 2.45-inch drive. There is a lot of room in here, but not enough. It seems to be for a 2.5. We do have like the 8GB storage over here. Sadly, there is only one 8GB and none, let's say, dual channel. Okay, then we have like the fan, and this is what I mean. So basically they're using an old chip in the inside. I think it's refurbished or something, but they completely designed a new mainboard and made it a mini PC. Here we do have like the Wi-Fi. There is no, and this is something you can maybe order or upgrade, but you can basically say you can implement an M2 and SSD. So that is even an option. So if you're going to get yourself like a big one, this is a 128GB I've been laying around, you can plug it in, and if you configure it with Bodacera, you have everything that is just inside the machine. But again, it's unfortunate there is no 2.5-inch SSD or normal hard drive you can put in this thing. So in my opinion, a little bit of a bummer. And also this freaking fan is quite loud. It sounds like a vacuum cleaner. So that left us with no choice by using the 3.0 at the front. Don't want to use a 2.0, otherwise yeah, we could use it, let's say, from the back. So I'm not the biggest fan of the USD 3.0 at the front, but nevertheless it's what it is. Let's try like this. Let's plug it in, let's boot it up, and let's try some games. Let's just see what can we actually play with this old school i5. But personally, I am not the biggest fan of using USB 2.0. Oh, don't get me wrong, like it's not super bad or something. But if you want to just make yourself like a mini PC and just want to use it like that, like a retro emulation beast, it's so much easier to plug it in and just have a lot of fun. Alright guys, so when you're looking at an image of Bodacera, of course there is a lot of stuff that we can play with, and I was really curious like how far can we push this. So the first thing that we're going to try out is with some MAME, then later on we're going to test out some N64, because that is basically something you cannot really play great on the Super Console X Android edition or with EmuELEC. So we're also going to do that. We're going to mess around with it. I can already tell you, like with an old school i5, I would not say like we can even play some PlayStation 3 or 2. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to try out is Atomic Wave. And by my surprise, this doesn't run very well on this. You would say like with an old school i5, this is like so much power back in the day, you can able to run some Atomic Wave. But I am guessing that this is actually like a problem when it comes to compatibility with the CPU. That is the only thing that I can basically think of. A little bit of a bummer. It's not a great start, but don't lose hope. Let's see where we can play more when it comes to MAME. Alright, so next up what I wanted to try is Killer Instinct for MAME. Because this game doesn't run very well on, let's say, a Raspberry Pi. Or you need to overclock it as crazy to get it at least like run a decent frame rate. And here you can see, despite this old school, let's say i5, we do have some issues with Atomic Wave somehow. But when you're looking at some MAME, it seems to be running just fine. So if you just want to have something like this for old school MAME games, it's gonna be just okay. Alright, so next up, let's try Killer Instinct 2, just we're like testing it anyway. But it's same like with the part 1, it seems to be running just fine. Alright, so unfortunate, we do have a lot of problems with some Dreamcast. Here you can see Sticky Naomi is absolutely unplayable. So let's test some more games. None of those great examples, a lot of devices. Think about Pandora's Box, Super Console X, or some other weird device that doesn't even run Mortal Kombat 2 at all, or not great. Crap, I knew he was going to do it, and I let the freaking duck button go. No, you cheap ass cheating biatch. But depending on what kind of game you want to play, in combination with what kind of emulator. For example, Sega Saturn is running pretty damn good with some two-dimensional stuff. It will have issues with three-dimensional stuff, that is just a fact. But it's pretty damn cool to see that we do have the option to play some two-dimensional games. I can hear it stutters here and there, but not really noticeable to the point that it's going to be quite annoying. Alright, so next up I wanted to try some Bloody Roar 2 on the PlayStation 1. Yeah, it's not like the most interesting system nowadays, simply because there are so many ways you can play PlayStation 1 now. But again, I just wanted to check it out, benchmark it, and from this point on, it's a little bit disappointing when it comes to emulation performance in general of this mini PC. On the number 4 position, this is basically the one I picked up from AliExpress. So what they're doing over there, you can buy them with all kinds of new CPUs. There was an old school i5. The performance and overall was a little bit disappointing, but I must say, like, you can also buy it with a newer chip. The main problem what I'm having with this version, even despite I'm putting it in my top 5, is that we have the problem that the new products are just more expensive, of course, than the second-hand products. It's of course like more an obvious moment, but they are using old chips with new cases, and that's basically why you're going to pay for. Nevertheless, I still really like the casing. It's a little bit, let's say, like a little bit bigger. It did lack the problem that we do have like no slot for a 2.5-inch drive in it, so we need to use an USB drive at the external part, but we do have like USB 2.0, but it was only at the front. So still, like, it has some okay performance, but that's the reason I'm going to put it on number 4. I personally really like the case, but it has such, like, say, limitations here and there. And for the number 3 position, I have put the Lenovo i3. So you would expect like the i3 is not going to be a powerful enough chip to run a lot of retro emulation. But I was very surprised, and that's the reason why it's going to be higher in my list than all the previous models. This Lenovo has a lot of potential. Take consideration there are a lot of different versions out there. There was the i3, but you also have the i5 for example, and maybe an i7. Think about it, more power is even made more possibilities. But nevertheless, when it comes to the, let's say, device itself, there were a lot of things I really liked about it. So let's take a close look at that. So in short, if you want to emulate some PlayStation 2, some GameCube, Wii, we do have some limitations, because still it's a very old mini PC, and because of they're like so small, you always have less power than your normal typical desktop with the same specifications, if that makes any sense what I'm saying. But this thing does have some interesting things. So to begin with, we do have an on and off switch, we have a headphone jack out, and we do have like 2 USB ports. Nothing really fancy. The Android boxes don't have always an on and off switch, so that part, it's a win for the mini PC. Depending on the age, let's say the later models don't have HDMI, not a big of a deal. We do have a converter for this, so we can just plug it in and use HDMI with audio. We have some extra USB ports over here. We have a VGA out for the old school part. We have an RJ45 Ethernet connection, and then again another USB port. So we got 5 in total, and input for the power supply. But there is another thing you need to take consideration if you're going to use the USB option. It's absolutely great if you want to use, let's say, a 2.5-inch drive. You just want to plug it in and you just want to play. Of course, in 3.5 is also possible. But the downside is, you can already see it over here, these hard drives are very fast. It comes even with 3.0 USB. And these devices having only 2.0. So in other words, you're going to lose some speed in here. So in my opinion, if you're going to get yourself an old system and you just want to use this thing for retro gaming, what you need to do is open it up and slap the hard drive in here. Okay, so with this version, or this Lenovo mini PC, doesn't have an M2 SSD inside. We're just going to keep it simple and keep it cheap, because the 2TB SSDs are very expensive and a normal hard drive are cheap as it can be. We're going to unplug the original hard drive and we're going to slap this thing in here. And basically what we're going to get ourselves is a completely configured Bottle Zero mini PC. We're going to power it on and we're going to have like a lot of fun. And we do have like the maximum speed because we have it connected with a SATA connector and not with a slow USB. Something I just want to point out, I've noticed in my previous video, is like when you're looking at mini PCs, always recommended that we do have like 2 DIMMs installed. For example, I'm having 8 GB in total, but I have 2 times 4 GB. So in this case, it's more enough for retro gaming, but we do have like the best performance. They messed it up in the beginning with some Super Console X devices. You pay a lot of money for it and you're only going to get like in 60 GB or 8 GB, only 1 DIMM inside. A little bit of a bummer, but I just wanted to point it out. In this case, there's not going to be any problem. But okay, so everything has been configured, set up, and depending on what kind of theme you're going to have, this is what you're going to see. So what I like about it is just simply like it's plug and play like a game system. When you're powering on the PC, it will boot up instantly into Battlezera if you're going to implement only that hard drive into the system. Alright, so the first step I wanted to do is MAME with some Tekken. These will not run on your typical, let's say, Android boxes. And I think that makes this Battlezera with a cheap PC more appealing than your typical Amiga devices or Raspberry Pi. Alright, so next up I want to try some other Tekken game, but this time it's going to be the Tekken Tag. This is another video game that is quite very difficult to emulate on some cheaper mini PCs, but I just wanted to push it to the limit and show you what you can do with an old school i3 Intel. Alright, so next up N64, a system that has so much problems when it comes especially the Amiga or the cheaper Android boxes. Most of the game will run on native resolution to get the best performance out of it. And again, like it's depending on how powerful your system is. You can already hear it, you can already see it. So basically with an F-Zero GX, a very demanding game on the GameCube, you're going to get a lot of stuttering and absolutely not a fun gameplay. Let's play a little bit, show you. Maybe we will get a decent FPS here, but there will be parts where it's going to be stuttering like crazy. That's exactly what I mean. Alright, so for the number 3 position, I've put the Lenovo on it. And the reason why is very simple. It's a second generation i3, but the performance in combination with Battlezera is pretty damn good. We can play up to PlayStation 1 and we even have like a lot of stuff on MAME that runs very well. I was quite surprised to see what you can do with it. Only it did come with some limitation when it comes to USB connectivity, but we can put in a hard drive inside the machine. So we can basically use this thing like a retro emulation beast and use it like a dedicated retro machine. Alright, so there was one particular system that I just needed to put on number 2. It's the Fujitsu i5. And the reason is very simple. This thing has so much to offer when it comes to the casing. For example, we have like a built-in power supply. We have the option to use a 2.5 inch drive internally. We have like so many cool things, including a card reader at the front and also a disk drive if you want to use a dual boot. So this thing has so much to offer and the emulation performance works very well, very good, especially with money where you're paying for it. So that's the reason I just put it high up in the list. Okay, but this Lenovo version I'm having here is an i3 model. You also have maybe one with an i5 or maybe even with an i7, but of course it's going to be more expensive. I picked it up for €79 and the reason I wanted to have it so badly is I just want to see what it's capable of for the money. Because the Raspberry Pi or Super Console X are basically like sometimes even expensive than this mini PC. We do have a lot of more stuff that we can play with it. But why did I pick this one up? It's very simple. I really love the form factor of this. So first of all, what we're going to get 3.0 ports over here. This thing comes of course with an on-off switch and we also have like a reset switch. But this thing even have the option to enter an SD card and I think that is pretty damn cool. So if you can boot up, let's say from an SD card, you load up some Battlezera in it, you can basically like plug it in and play games like this. It's not the best way in my opinion, but it's a fun way to do so. And also it even have like a built-in drive, so you can just play some games if you want to use the Windows functionality. We're not going to talk about it because I want to mainly focus on the emulation part. Okay, another thing I really like about it, that this thing comes with a built-in power supply that you need to only have a 2-pin, plug it in and you're ready to go. So then we also have like an internal fan, it's not very noisy. We have a DVI, we're going to get the 2 USB 3.0 again, 2 USB 2.0, we have like audio out, display out, RJ45 for internet connection, but unfortunately this thing doesn't have an HDMI port. But that doesn't spoil the fun. We do have like these cheap plug and play things that converts the display port into an HDMI and it works like a charm, including audio. Another thing I personally really like about this is that besides that it's a little bit thicker and bigger than the previous one, is that we do have like a lot of options. Here you can see like I can swap out the drive if you want to, but also on the other side we can just basically like pull out this latch, and when you're going to do this it's going to be quite difficult. Come on, come on. Stuff like this happens always in the freaking video. Alright, so let's take a close look in the inside. Finally, I managed to remove the freaking valve at the top. But what you can see already over here, so this thing is coming with an SSD, so what you can do is like load the Bodacera image through the USB and do it like a dual boot. But for now, if you just want to use this thing like a dedicated game machine, you can remove the SSD inside here and just place it with an SD or 2.5 drive. Another thing I really like is that we do have like dual channel. It's going to be in total 8 gigabytes of RAM. Of course, you can always try to upgrade it, but basically like 8 gigabytes is more enough so far I understand. But okay, so let's plug this thing back together and yeah, let's plug it in my television and just see how good and what we can play with it. Okay, but for the people who didn't know, like basically these PCs can play 8-bit, 16-bit era very well. So we're not going to test that. I just want to see from MAME, especially when it comes to some Killer Instinct, second stuff that is very hard to or better like difficult or impossible to run on a lot of Super Console X devices, just to see what we can do with this mini PC. And we do have some Super Console X devices that will run it okay, but again, it's going to be like a mixed performance depending on what kind of model. Alright, so moving on to Killer Instinct, a game I have noticed a lot of people were requesting it, like if it runs on a Pandora's box, but nope, it doesn't work on the Pandora's box, and also a lot of issue with the Raspberry Pi number 4, so... And the mini PCs, even the cheaper ones, will have the option to run this, so it's pretty damn cool. Alright, so when you're looking at Thomas Wave, runs very well on this. For the Super Console X, we do have some mixed performance, but with the Raspberry Pi, it runs most of the time pretty damn good. But again, just a great thing to test out. Okay, so for the final main test, what I wanted to do is test out some Tekken Tag. This one is more demanding than all the previous one, but I just wanted to give you like a quick overview of which one will run fine. But also the Tekken Tag seems to be running very well on this. But this is not like something really special. We do have like a lot of like a cheaper devices. Think about Super Console X or Raspberry Pi that runs Dreamcast pretty damn good. Alright, so next up we're going to try out some Sega Saturn. But I've noticed with some emulators, some will run very well on a certain kind of chipset. Sega Saturn is really demanding. I just want to check out Panzer Dragoon. What you can see over here, the emulation performance is pretty damn good. Despite this thing is a little bit more expensive and a little bit more powerful than the previous models or mini PCs I've tested, this thing seems to be running just fine. I can hear like a minor hiccup, but personally I don't really mind it. So especially if you're going to play some two-dimensional games, you will have like even better performance of course. But I'm just going to be honest, I'm very surprised with this. Alright, so let's try out N64. I've tried it many times before on all kinds of, let's say, Android boxes, but as we have so many issues, and that's what I like about these Bodacera versions, that just Bodacera combination with the mini PC, we do get so many great performance. Try to hit him. Nope, didn't hit him. I'm just gonna be honest, like, playing this with a normal controller is like a freaking pain in the ass. But you get the point. On PlayStation Portable. PlayStation Portable is a system that is very hard to emulate on cheaper boxes. Think about Super Console X, Raspberry Pi. I did see some pretty good, let's say, overall performance. But especially PlayStation Portable is so difficult. God of War will always be a problem. You need to have like a lot of power for it. But when you look at most PlayStation Portable games, we do have like a very good support for this. So if you just want to enjoy on low resolutions, I think a mini PC like this is more than enough powerful. And of course the chipset is new, so this means, or newer than the other ones, because if your chipset is too old, it hasn't any support with the emulator PPSSPP that it's basically running on. Okay, so the next one is the Fujitsu, if I'm saying it correctly, the name. So basically what I really like about it, that it does have like a lot of options. To begin with, even like having a DVI option for the connectivity. We didn't have an HDMI, but with a converter you can change it back to HDMI with audio. We have USB 2.0, 3.0. We can implement, let's say, a hard drive inside the machine. We have a built-in power supply. So this thing is a little bit bigger, thicker than the other ones, but you have like a lot of options, including a drive if you want to use it like a dual boot with some retro games. And we have like an SD card unit at the front. So it had like a little bit more options when it comes to previous models, and also specification-wise, I really liked it. Alright, so for the number one position I have chosen to put the Xeon Mini PC.
And the reason why is very simple, not because of the price. You would say for the price, basically the i5, the Fujitsu would be that number one. But the reason I put the Xenon on it, because performance wise this thing is absolutely a beast compared with all the other competition. And yep, this thing is way more expensive. So it's always like quite difficult to find the right balance when it comes to performance and price. But I think this Xenon is a beautiful PC, like a very compact case, completely full metal, and just it looks amazing. The compatibility with so many emulators was pretty damn good, and you can just buy it also in different kind of models when it comes to the CPU. And yeah, already mentioned in the main review, the Intel Xeon, you would not say like this is going to be like a super high-end like specification CPU, but when you're going to look into the CPU chart, you will see that it's absolutely crazy good. Like it's comparable with an i7 on the later generations. So that's the reason I just want to put this thing in the number one position, because it has so much potential. But let's take a close look at it. Looking at the Super Console X Android Edition, this thing only weighs 107 grams. So this thing is light as a feather. And that is what I noticed with the Super Console X. Also the Pro is the same story. But when you take a close look at this bad boy, the Super Console X PC, it's more than 1 kilogram. So I can say this thing is like a freaking brick. So at the front of the device we're going to get two USB 3.0 ports, a micro USB, the on and off switch, a power LED and of course an audio jack out. But let's take a closer look at back, because we're going to get a lot of USB ports. Again, 2 ports for 3.0 USB, 2 ports USB 2.0, and display port, HDMI out and Ethernet connection input for power supply. But also we're going to get 2 tiny Wi-Fi antennas for of course the Wi-Fi capabilities. And the reason why we're having 2 antennas, because this is an Intel dual board wireless AC 3155 that is using in combination with the antennas. Alright, so here we're having the first module is in DDR4 running on 2666 MHz, in total 8 GB, but the other one is on the other side. Nevertheless, we're having here the NVMe slot that is not in use, as you can see over here. So the CPU is cooled by this gigantic cooler, and I can say it gets it quite hot, but keeps the CPU quite cool, and not to forget it's super silent. But this assembly of this case is super easy and everybody can do it, simply because we need to remove 4 screws for each panel. If you remove them, you can just lift it open. I need to point out with the second panel, the hard drive is basically screwed on the second panel. You need to be very gently when you're removing it, because there is a special connector that goes straight into the main board, and if you wiggle it around and you didn't do it right, you'll basically ruin it. Here we're having the King Fast. This is just only NVMe is inside this machine. That is for the Windows 10, because yep, it's installed. Okay, here we're having the second module, the second DDR4 4GB module. That makes in total 8GB. We're having the extra pins, which you can see over here. This pin has been connected with the hard drive that is screwed on the second panel. This is basically in 2 TB that contains all the files, and basically all the files that we're going to get and need for having this emulation machine. But they're using a SATA to this special connector for connecting it to the mainboard. But nevertheless, this is a Western Digital 2 TB hard disk, and I'm hoping in the future, if SSDs will become affordable, maybe it's a fun and great idea to upgrade it to an SSD. So for the CPU, it's kind of surprising. We're going to get an Intel Xeon A3 5005M that is running on 2.80 GHz. RAM in total, we're having 8GB DDR4 that is divided over 2 modules of 4GB. The GPU is an Intel HD 530. Storage, we're having 2 of them. The first one is a King Fast 128GB. This is for Windows 10, and we're having a 2 TB Western Digital hard disk inside that is running the Batocera Linux edition for the emulation station. Okay, so when it comes to compatibility, we do have like a lot of similarities with the previous models. Think about the old school stuff, MAME, Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct, Tekken MAME, you name it, it will run on just fine on this one too. Of course, because it has more power. But this piece of equipment, it's more powerful, but it is not like the point it's powerful that will run up to Xbox and PlayStation 3. We still will have limitations that we're also going to see, like budget, like mini PCs. But let's do a quick overview of all the systems I've tested out without any commentary this time.
Okay, so what I've noticed with these mini PCs, we do have so many different configurations when it comes to like what kind of CPUs, how much RAM, what kind of RAM, and also like what kind of configuration when it comes to controllers, or better said, USB ports, and of course connectivity like an HDMI or a DisplayPort.